Next up, we have Zekrom, the dragon of ideals, the mascot of Pokemon White version, and first to possess the incredibly cool typing of Dragon Electric. This Pokemon and its counterpart have one of the most inspired designs in the entire series. They come from Yin and Yang, with Zekrom based on Yin. As with Reshiram, Zekrom has really interesting inspiration behind its design. And if you're into that kind of thing, we encourage you to check out its Bulbapedia page's origin section, and how every aspect of its design contrasts Reshiram's. The Wikipedia page for Yin and Yang is also a good time. Today we'll be examining how Zekrom affected the competitive scene. Did it get its thunder stolen, or was its whole life thunder? We'll find out, because we're asking the question, how good was Zekrom actually? And in this video we'll be going over these competitive formats. Right from day one of Gen 5 Ubers, Zekrom established itself as one of the most unique Pokemon around, thanks to its Electric Stab, a trait almost entirely unseen in the Uber tier, yet whose power was undeniable. Zekrom's Bolt Strike quickly became one of the most feared attacks around, as it ripped through several titans of the metagame, primarily Kyogre, as well as Ho-Oh and Lugia. Of course, Electric wasn't Zekrom's only stab, it also packed several high-powered Dragon Stabs that complemented Bolt Strike perfectly, as they tore through the common Dragon types and Groudon that would thwart the latter. Bolt Strike was also a great complement to Zekrom's Dragon moves, as it crushed most Steel types. In addition to the great coverage offered by its stabs, Zekrom was incredibly powerful, meaning that bulky support Arceus forms couldn't safely switch into it, especially with spikes down. Now, there were two common Pokemon that resisted Zekrom's stabs, Ferrothorn and Excadrill. But Zekrom's mix set had no issues with slapping on Focus Blast, which also destroyed Steel Arceus. This made Zekrom one of the best Pokemon at ripping through the Tentacruel Ferrothorn combination, even in rain. The mix set was also excellent because its Draco Meteor allowed it to lure and pulverize Groudon, Gliscor, and Hippowdon, as well as generally being more consistently threatening, as it was able to easily fire off a strong Dragon Stab without needing to lock into Outrage. This tremendous wall breaking made Zekrom an excellent, important piece of many strong offensive teams. It was one of the most nightmarish threats this side of Darkrai for stall teams in particular. In fact, Zekrom could pull off one of the rarest, most impressive feats in Pokemon. Its Life Orb Bolt Strike could actually take out even a fully healthy, physically defensive Lugia in one shot. Even when Lugia received Multiscale in Black and White 2, Zekrom wasn't phased, as its Terra Vault ignored it completely. Speaking of Black and White 2 editions, that's when Zekrom received Tailwind, which was a tremendous boon for its mix set. Now it could bypass its somewhat middling speed and blitz past offense while still shellacking defense. Alternatively, it can make use of another Black and White 2 edition in Roost, whose extra longevity was valuable in allowing it to completely dismantle defense by removing their ability to dance around it via passive damage, such as the recoil from its own Life Orb. Now, while Zekrom was unquestionably both fearsome and distinct as a wall breaker, it was but one of many such ferocious monsters that inhabited the tier. However, it had another role that was difficult to truly replicate, as it really made the most of its unique qualities. This came in the form of its Choice Scarf set. You might ask, what separated Zekrom from other strong, effective Dragon-type Scarfers like Dialga and Palkia? Well, the answer was simple: Volt Switch. This move fully capitalized on the opponent's switches by allowing Zekrom to safely get its teammates on the field and maintain momentum for its team, as well as providing more chip damage to boot. Using Volt Switch against Kyogre was one of the safest moves possible, guaranteeing good damage if it stayed in, while still capitalizing on the Ferrothorn switch. The move was especially devastating alongside the ever-present spikes, and generally created many win-win scenarios that allowed Zekrom to fit beautifully on hyper offense teams in particular, letting them easily maintain the offensive pressure they relied on. Zekrom was the zenith of Dragon-type Scarfers, and all in all, was one of the most unique, solid Pokemon in Gen 5 Ubers. Zekrom's mix set took a massive hit in Generation 6, as Draco Meteor's base power was lowered from 140 to 130. However, the Choice Scarf set remained excellent, as it was a characteristic staple of hyper offense right from early XY. Its immensely powerful Bolt Strike was an important offensive check to a plethora of dangerous opposing threats, namely Yveltal, Spec Kyogre, and Mega Mewtwo Y, while its momentum-maintaining Volt Switch was terrific in getting the threats on its own team on the field. With Sleep Talk, it was also a great check to Darkrai. It was fairly one-dimensional and only really fit on those hyper-offense teams, but that was just fine. Its role was an important one, and it was effective in it. However, Zekrom's time in Gen 6 Ubers came to a brutal, screeching halt with the release of Olraz. Primal Groudon emerged from a pit of ancient lava that simultaneously submerged Zekrom's viability. Some players attempted to use a Shukaberry Hone Claws set that could potentially lure and beat Primal Groudon, while also acting as a check to Mega Salamence, but this role was generally performed much better by Dialga, who had more effective defensive typing, could support with Stealth Rock, and could fit a move that KO'd Excadrill into its moveset. Now, Zekrom wasn't completely unviable. It was no Reshiram, that's for sure, but it was never used in serious tournament games for a reason. Generation 6 was Zekrom, interrupted. Zekrom just couldn't get anything going at all in Generation 7. There were some attempts to rejuvenate its Hone Claws set now that it got an extra power boost from Z-moves, and it could be threatening on occasion since it could now destroy Primal Groudon as long as it's set up beforehand. However, it was generally outclassed as a Z-move using Wall Breaker by Necrozma Dustmane, Zygarde Complete, and Arceus Ground, since these Pokemon were far more defensively useful in addition to posing an offensive threat. Speaking of Arceus Ground, it was everywhere, as was Arceus Fairy. This ensured Zekrom would struggle to do even the one thing it was supposed to do, wall breaking. The fact that it got run over by nearly every offensive Pokemon was bad enough, but if it couldn't even threaten defensive cores reliably, then there really was no reason to use Zekrom, and thus, no one did. It was too slow, too useless defensively, and too easily played around offensively. Some players attempted to go the opposite route and find use for Zekrom with a physically defensive set with Dragon Tail that could check Mega Salamence and Marshadow, surviving even a +1 Earthquake or soul-stealing 7-star Strike, respectively, while crippling bulky switch-ins with Toxic. Sadly, Zekrom was too shaky a check to everything it was supposed to answer, such as Ho-Oh, physical Primal Kyogre, and the aforementioned Pokemon, and the set didn't take off. As such, Zekrom continued to toll in obscurity. Throughout Generation 7, Zekrom was a 0. Zekrom faces the same unfortunate fate as Reshiram of being a Gen 5 legendary, meaning it was never given a chance to shine in an unrestricted meta in its own generation's game, since Gen 5 never ran anything similar to GS Cup. Zekrom's first crack at VGC wasn't until 2016, where it found itself hard-pressed to thrive in a metagame full of Primal Groudon and Xerneas, aka 2 immunities to its stab typings. Yeah, not great. Zekrom didn't put up any results in 2016, but 2019's tripled metas gave it some room to shine when its biggest threats were weaker. Zekrom was a curious pick in general. While it still suffered against Pokemon like Xerneas and Groudon, its access to Tailwind gave it a chance to gain momentum for its whole team, and it packed a huge amount of raw power via its 150 base attack and its signature move, Bolt Strike. Zekrom could heavily threaten flying types such as Yveltal and Ho-Oh, but it was undoubtedly most valuable for the huge threat it posed to Kyogre, notoriously one of the best Pokemon in restricted formats. As such, Zekrom actually did best when Kyogre was the most powerful, namely in the Sun and Moon series, where the lack of Primal Reversion or Mega Evolution meant Kyogre's place in the meta was much stronger than Groudon and Rayquaza's. Still, most of its results were outside top 8 placings. Zekrom's first big result came at the Oceania Internets, where Ragav Malavia used it to place 10th with a set of Fusion Bolt, Bolt Strike, Tailwind, and Protect. Ragav actually picked Zekrom specifically because they had won a regional just before with the Yveltal team that led to a spike in usage for the Pokemon Y mascot. Meanwhile, Kyogre was still easily the most popular restricted mon in the format. And what beats both of those Pokemon? Ding ding ding, Zekrom. You can see that specifically behind Ragav's choice in the fact that they used dual electric moves. Bolt Strike was overwhelmingly powerful, but its 85% accuracy made it unreliable, and Ragav valued having electric coverage over anything else as their team handled ground types well already. Their spread also took advantage of Bolt Strike's power and Zekrom's access to Tailwind, moving points from attacking stats and speed into bulk. Compacted with the item choice of Moggle Berry, this meant Zekrom could potentially set up a second Tailwind to set up a late game Kyogre sweep. While Zekrom usually sat out battles against Xerneas, but was a valuable tool against Yveltal, Kyogre, and Ho-Oh teams. Other than Ragav, Zekrom's only real successes came from Korea. Jae-Hoon Lee used it to place 9th in the Korean League Season 2 at the end of the Moon series, along with Zekrom's counterpart Reshiram. Perhaps Zekrom's most impressive result, though, came from Tae-Suk Ro, who placed 3rd at the Korean Nationals using a Zekrom and Kyogre team. Taeseok's bronze medal is notable not just for being Zekrom's highest result, but for taking place in the midst of Ultra Series. Some of that may owe to Korea's penchant for Ray Ogre teams and really just Kyogre in general. Taeseok's Zekrom pick was a very smart anti-meta choice. Zekrom may have been limited in what it could do, but it could be applied like an electric scalpel, able to surgically eliminate opposing threats that didn't like to get zapped. Still, its limited coverage, lack of reliability on its stab moves, and bad matchups against certain Pokemon made it an uncommon and overall less prevalent pick. Special thanks to Ragav Milovia for the info. Upon its return in Pokemon Home, Generation 8 finally gave Zekrom some new zest, with one of the best moves it could have gotten, Dragon Dance, allowing it to boost its power while at long last bypassing its speed issue. This was threatening enough on its own, but it was compounded further by Dynamax, which Zekrom instantly became one of the very best abusers of. Not only did its doubled HP stat make it tremendously bulky, but its Max Lightning summoned Electric Terrain, powering it up even further. Dynamax Dragon Dance Zekrom both killed everything and was unkillable itself. It was so absurdly powerful that alongside fellow new Dragon Dancer Necrozma Dustmane, it was largely responsible for the creation of the Dynamax ban list. Pokemon that started out this generation tiered in Ubers as well as Ditto were not allowed to Dynamax anymore. However, DD Zekrom was not entirely reliant on Dynamax to function, and thus remained a threat. Quagsire was common for its ability to stave off Zacian Crown, and Zekrom was adept at exploiting this, as its Terravolt ability meant it bypassed Quagsire's unaware, leaving it to get obliterated by a boosted Dragon Claw. It did have some issues though. It struggled against Lunala, whose Shadow Shield wasn't broken by Terravolt, as well as both members of the popular Hippowdon Excadrill combination. Furthermore, it had strong competition from none other than Kyurem Black, who was still allowed to Dynamax, since it had not immediately started out in Ubers, and was thus generally preferred. However, Zekrom wasn't outclassed. It loved not needing to run heavy-duty boots like Kyurem White did, and retained a solid place in the metagame. Then the Isle of Armor came around, bringing it an expanded Pokedex and new Dynamax abusers like Volcarona. Zekrom still had to compete with Kyurem Black, but some of its advantages became more pronounced, specifically its fire resistance, which allowed it to act as a decent check to Sun teams. Of course, Dynamax Dragon Dance Kyurem Black was an absurd Pokemon, so in a nutshell, it was better, but Zekrom was a better overall Pokemon than Kyurem Black outside of Dynamax. As a result, it retained a solid place in the metagame as a Dragon Dancer for teams with different Dynamaxers such as Gyarados or the aforementioned Volcarona. Finally, Crown Tundra came around and Dynamax was unleashed in its entirety once again. Zekrom left Kyurem Black in the dust and effortlessly terrorized entire teams once again. The only reason it wasn't given more attention was because the tier was suddenly overrun by Dynamax abusers that were somehow even more absurd, specifically Calyrex Shadow, with Zygarde Complete and Xerneas not far behind. Of course, Zekrom being somewhat forgotten made it even more threatening. Dynamax was banned as a whole before long, which meant Kyurem Black wouldn't rise again. Instead, Zekrom retained an excellent place in the metagame. Zacian Crown now completely ruled the metagame, which led to a massive rise in Yveltal plus Eternatus plus Necrozma Dustmane core. Of course, Zekrom blasted through after a single Dragon Dance. It had plenty of setup opportunities too. It threatened out Yveltal itself, which couldn't risk taking a Bolt Strike lest it leave its team vulnerable to Zekrom's partner, Calyrex. Zekrom was a great partner for Zacian as well, as it would cleave huge holes in teams, allowing the wolf to easily clean up the remains. Now, Zekrom didn't instantly destroy entire teams. The ubiquity of bulky Xerneas and Groudon saw to that, but with just the slightest bit of chip damage, Zekrom could potentially start a snowball effect that led an easy win even if it fainted in the process. It used Roost in its last move slot more than before, giving it longevity that allowed it to somewhat check Kyogre, which was otherwise difficult to truly damage for many teams. Kyogre's return and dominance was also valuable for Zekrom because it put a huge dent in the popularity of sand teams, which were Zekrom's biggest natural enemy. Eventually, Zacian Crown was banned, and the metagame was no longer forced into cores so easily exploitable by Zekrom. Furthermore, the popularity of Scarf Calyrex is greatly irritating for it, as was the resurgence of Sand. Nevertheless, Zekrom remains an excellent Pokemon in Generation 8 Ubers, easily its best since its debut. And that's it. So how good was Zekrom actually? Well, it started off strong in the generation it was one of the mascots of, establishing itself as one of the most unique Ubers. Its flagship Choice Scarf set followed it into early XY, but the presence of Primal Groudon almost single-handedly put its viability entirely on hold until Generation 8. In Sword and Shield, however, Zekrom returned to greatness, utilizing its newfound Dragon Dance to terrifying effect. It's also had some successes in VGC. It's not perfect, but it certainly had its place. Overall, Zekrom has had a zinger of a competitive career. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Zekrom? How would you change it? What would you give it to make it not scared of Primal Groudon? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.